Welcome back to Equal Time Soccer. The time loop continues. I'm in the Black Heart. Rumors that I have a cot in the basement are unconfirmed, but certainly possible. Matt's on the ground in Chicago because he can't get enough. How's it in Chicago, Matt?
It's pretty rainy. It's pretty cold. This game will be almost nothing like any of the other games conditions-wise. It's
Right.
pretty consistently drizzling. It was raining. The same storm that went through the Twin Cities last night, if folks are in Minnesota and remember how heavy that rain was, that storm then hit Chicago. Our pilot said that on the flight in this morning. But it is a turf field. I think that field will be fine, but it is wet and cold.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a lot different than some of the heat we've seen so far. Aurora just showed up. They're literally here coming out the bus as we speak.
There you go. Way to go, Steven. Steven did his job. We can count on him. Just an hour and a half till kickoff. And for people who are watching this, we posted last night, but we will be getting the game on over here in the Black Heart at noon. So we're going to see how many people show up. I don't know. We haven't had a lot of noon games, and this is a big game with a little different matchup today because we won 6-1 against Dutch Lions, a team that that Aurora had already beaten fairly easily. With the primary starters going today, a little different I might expect from Coach Lukic. She usually rotates quite a bit in the away games, but here it's such a big matchup with Chicago City. What do you expect to see in terms of that? And we see Aurora coming in right behind you.
Everyone's getting their cameos. I would expect to see some continued rotation. In particular, you and I have talked about how, one of the spaces that seems to be even now still up for grabs is that right wing spot. I think it'll be curious to see if they continue to rotate that or if someone plants some roots there. I think it's worth noting that Chicago started with a couple of shutout wins, but the last 3 games, they've all been 1-goal affairs or ties. And both of the last 2 games, Chicago City got their second goal within the final minutes of the game. So similar to how Minnesota had a strong game against in their last match, but gave up that late free kick, it'll be another challenge because City has shown that they stay in the game right till the end. So I would assume we see a little bit more rotation, as we go. I think it'll be interesting to see if we see some more keeper rotation again today as well.
Yeah, you get the sense maybe Coach Lukic is leaning towards Purba, but I think she's still she's open. I mean, she's rotating a lot. And I said it with Danny in the previous show. I bet if things had gone simpler in Rochester, Bayless Flynn was probably due to get a little cameo because that's just what she does when the game's comfortable. So, yeah, still wide open. I'm sure the keepers are loving that they still feel like they have a chance,
Well, and I think even if Purba ends up being the quote unquote number 1, I think you're still going to see some rotation throughout the summer just because Lukic has been so high on how competitive that keeper
equal time
competition has been.
Equal time guest Sophie French gave us the piece.
So I think even if Purba has earned that number 1 spot, I think I'm still curious when that keeper rotation will happen, just for the sake of honoring the tough battle that took place in camp too.
Yeah. Talk about other newcomers that have impressed you. There's a lot of them. They're still rotating. People are getting their shot. Some, like Paula 10 just getting back. Like we haven't seen out of her. But for who's been on the field, who's impressed you so far?
Yeah, I think probably without a doubt, the most impactful newcomer has been, well, I guess it'd be right now a close tie between Tiana Harris and Hannah Adler. I think Kennedy Faulkner, when she was in, before she got out with that knock, was also both she and Tiana. I mean, talk about 2 center backs, might be 2 of the best center backs in the whole league, and they're both new additions for Aurora. I think Adler seems to have such a big impact because that attacking group is so competitive. There's so many strong contributors, and yet she still is just a staple at that number 10. I think for Aurora fans like myself that just loved Sungmin Cha and what she brought to the midfield, it's kind of crazy to be able to get like such a replacement and maybe even arguably, an upgrade, someone with pro experience overseas, the beach national team experience. So I think Adler is a player almost similar to like an Addie Wykers, where they don't get a ton of, flashy attention celebration wise, the way like a Mariah Wynn or even like Kat Rapp this year, Maya Hansen. But I think those 2 in the central midfield could really, Addie, Kat Rapp, and Hannah Adler could be argued that that's really sort of the core of the team and what sort of raises the floor so high.
Yeah, and they also kind of whoever is sliding in too. Like if Morgan Stone's in the back, something that's really, I mean, it's really a difference a little bit in how the ball's played out, and partly it's because the center backs are really good at it. I mean, Kelsey Kaufusi is a good passer of the ball as well, but Tiana and Kennedy, like it when. I watch a lot of the game where Addie is sitting deep in the 6 as kind of the lone holder, and she's not really being the one distributing. It's like it's more of T sending the ball down the line, Kennedy sending a long ball, and it kind of, I don't know, it frees up Addie to just focus on being the defensive player. And it's also just, it's such a dynamic offense where, especially if you then have Langdock playing outside back, she's just a classic modern, creator from there too. So it's just extremely dynamic coming from the back.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's a better example of how competitive the Aurora midfield is than the fact that Morgan Stone is a bench player this year. I mean, there's few better individual examples. I guess, Eli Rapp not even starting on the back line, all these players. So Sophie French regularly comes off the bench and she has pro experience. I mean, it's Morgan Stone is probably one of the best individual examples of that. Just she can come in, she sort of has to be the backup 6 because the team is not super deep on true holding mids. So she kind of has to spell Addie, because Addie has actually kind of had to spell center backs at times. So it's ended up being a really impressive rotation. And I think no matter who's in that back line, you've seen that distribution, like you're saying, and it's been a real dangerous weapon for sure.
Yeah, the team's really balanced in the sense of, like Danny and I have spoken about this, that the offensive players defend really well and the defensive players play well in offense. So, I mean, the coaches have given them the space, but obviously balanced them in a way that's been really productive. I'm going to read an ad here. This show is brought to you by Pentz Homes. As you know, whether you're buying or selling, we're looking to do some projects in your current home. Nate and Lydia can help you find what you need. Need financing for a basement remodel, looking at a second bath, or even a workspace now that you're working from home? Pentz Homes and their preferred lender, Andy Shearer, with Luminant Financing, can help find the right financing tool for you. Go to pentzhomes.com or learn more on social media at Pentz Homes. Talk a little bit. We mentioned this, but how do you expect Coach Lukic to handle the center back depth? It's a good problem to have, theoretically, thinking Paula Ten should be able to come in and fight to contribute as well. Kaufusi got back in the lineup, so kind of an embarrassment of riches maybe in the center.
I think the surprising thing this season has been, because of injuries and because of certain rotation, I think that sort of extreme center back depth hasn't really been that way game to game, but now we're reaching a point where all of them are back. So, early on, Kelsey Kaufusi got that hamstring knock, but now she's been back and playing regularly. Kennedy Faulkner then had been starting and playing 90 minutes, but then she got a knock. So she was out. Hopefully she's back soon. And then you mentioned Paola Ten, coming in from the Dominican Republic, playing in the CONCACAF U20s. I would expect someone like Paola Ten to get minutes, if for no other reason than Tiana Harris has been having to play, 90 minutes almost every single game. And even though she wants those minutes to stay sharp and she's looked so good, in all phases of the game, I still think you're going to see someone like a Paola Ten eventually, maybe not this game. She only got in, I think, a few days ago, and so she's only had a few trainings, but I would not be surprised if she makes the 18 in the next game or two and actually sees some minutes, just for the sake of rotating that center back group, because despite the sheer, immense amount of talent back there still have been some game-to-game injuries. And so I would expect, to continue to see that rotation, but I think you'll also still see an Addie Wickers get minutes back there just because Lukic can trust her. And so even though Wickers is a 90-minute of the game quality holding mid, we know at Utah State she's a center back pair with Kelsey Kaufusi. So I think you'll continue to see, at minimum, Kaufusi, Wickers, and Harris for sure as the core rotation. And then if Faulkner can get back, that would be so huge.
She's pretty impactful. She has certain traits that others, just the stature, the ability to get headers on the ball, which T does as well. But we don't have a lot of players who do those things. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, on the other hand, you need a player like that come playoff time. So I'm sure they won't risk anything with Faulkner. But, yeah, her coming back would be just, like we've said, an embarrassment of riches at that position. I mean, just almost absurd depth at center back.
I do wonder about, obviously, T's been able to go 90 minutes, but also for the players who weren't in a spring season, or even if especially for that, you're still coming in and now you're playing 2 games in a week. It's like you do have to adjust. They're 23 or 22, but it still takes time. So yeah, I would think at least in a second half sub in a game that's more comfortable, and then maybe a start, and we're still going to have a couple games where just quite honestly, the coaches will feel confident in knowing they should be able to get to that rotation place. Let's talk about some of the potential opponents. We're getting close to halfway through the season. You've mentioned you've been doing some tweeting about this kind of in the weeds, but we know a little bit of what the playoff picture could be like because the W League did put out their format at 16 teams. With the expanded conferences, it's a grouping of the Valley Division, Great Lakes, and us basically would be the first round matchups, right? So between those three, there's going to be 4 teams. Right. So, and it's like the teams from Valley it'll either be Indy 11 or Racing Louisville. And they're both really quality teams. Great Lakes Division. The second place. It could be someone like Midwest United, Kalamazoo, FC Ann Arbor if they get hot, or it could also be a team like Chicago City or Green Bay from our Heartland Division.
Yeah, I think the thing to watch is, that Great Lakes Division, quite frankly, I think may have already almost lost themselves that playoff bid. And part of the reason is so many ties have already taken place and the entire wild card is based on points per game. And so
they played a little longer than us too. They have more games through the schedule.
Yeah, they don't have as many games to make up those points. And the other thing, just to be brutally honest, I think that Great Lakes Division has shown itself to be more competitive than the Heartland Division. And that's a reason why teams are drawing each other. More teams are picking up losses. And so it's going to be a little bit ironic that the quality of the division overall might cost them that wild card spot because, as you mentioned, Chicago City right now is in pole position with points per game. But Bavarians now are right behind them. And even, to be honest,
Green Bay
maybe Green Bay.
Yeah.
And the big thing is the big reason Chicago City, I think, has, the strongest odds isn't just because they're currently in second, but they got a win over Green Bay directly. And so they were able to pick up that win, but it's still very much wide open. And I think down in the Valley Division, it's only a 5-team division, so they only have one playoff bid. Racing Louisville beat Indy in their second matchup, and their first matchup was a tie. And so Racing really is in pole position down in the Valley Division. So if folks are trying to sort of, begin their early absurd scouting the way I have been, like Racing and then Indy has an outside chance. And then honestly, this Heartland Division, the race for second place is probably the more interesting race in the Heartland Division because if Minnesota, for instance, is able to pick up a win here, the divisional race won't necessarily be in play much longer, but that second place one, as you said, 3 teams are pretty much in the running for it.
Well, I mean, of all the scores, of all the goals, Aurora has 25 goal difference. They still only have 2 points on Chicago City. So if they lay an egg and trip up, it doesn't matter that you scored 10. You're behind. So it's and we've seen with Aurora too. Home games are different than away. Away you get the full setup. Rarely do the teams travel full, so it's a different challenge in Chicago. What do you expect of fans? There was a decent little crew for the Dutch Lions, so I don't know. I wouldn't expect anything different. This is a Sunday as well. Have you heard from parents? Do you expect there to be a little crowd?
I think the last time Minnesota came down to Chicago City last year, I think Maya Hansen has some like aunts and cousins. I think they were here. I haven't seen as much of a contingent this time as we saw at Aurora University in Aurora, Illinois, where Aurora plays the Dutch Lions. But there is, if you look over here, that white tent has, maybe 200, 250 Chicago City sort of family, or maybe like 150, 200 family members kind of hanging out, doing like a potluck thing. You see the broadcast tent. Maybe you can see it on the top of that stand there. And then they have a setup where they're selling sort of merch and maybe some concessions. I don't know about a ton of concessions. So at the very least, I think you'll see these stands filled up. I will say, as an early warning to folks, the broadcast angle is going to be pretty low. I've watched some of the Chicago City matches, and so you might not be able to see the off-ball movement quite as much as at other places, but if we find some Aurora fans, we'll definitely talk to them.
Get them in the thread, yeah. How much so it's been fun to see the W League grow. We talked about, in some unbalanced ways, some teams are like getting some learning curve into the new league, but there are a lot of exciting teams. I'm just curious, like Oakland Soul, the Glens, and Cal Storm are all really doing it on and off the field on the West Coast. We talk about it a lot, but there's other teams that have added, you know, in the East Coast, there's Northwest. I'm just curious for you who engages with the league a little bit, like how much do you hear from those people, or like, you know, get caught up in following the excitement of seeing what other teams are doing this year 2?
Yeah, I think the expansion teams this year, you know, last year the league launched with about 44 teams. I think this year they're around 60.
Yeah.
To me, like my read of the new expansion clubs is that it's a similar makeup to the league as a whole, where you saw several sort of top performers, folks who really invest in broadcast, player resources, player housing, you know, coaching, travel, all those things.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, that's maybe the top third of teams that really, really heavily invest. And the teams you mentioned are the ones like the Cal Storms of the world, the Glens, the Oakland Souls. I mean, basically that whole NorCal division is heavy hitters. And the crazy thing is, you know, some of the best teams in the league might all be in that division, and, you know, they'll be cut down before playoffs happen. I think you do still see teams in the Midwest that are, you know, in the Heartland division or other divisions near us joining, where, to be honest, one thing to really give credit to some of these clubs for, because some of the setups are a little bit scrappy. We've seen teams not travel too many folks. I do think it's maybe underappreciated just a bit how short of a runway some of these clubs gave themselves. So for instance, you know, the group out of Racine building a men's and women's team essentially from scratch. You know, Aurora talked about having sort of a quick build and building all that stuff, but some of these clubs have an incredibly short runway. Similar when we've talked to Sioux Falls, I think in the WPSL set up in maybe 4 months. And that's about the runway some of these clubs have had in the Heartland division, where they really build from almost nothing. And it's, you know, a group trying to pull it together. And so I think it's just legitimately hard to build a full set of sort of team resources all at once like that. And so that's when you start to see, you know, does year 2, do they have more time to prepare, all of that stuff. But I think the new group is essentially, I would say, sort of that 1/3 or 25% seem to be the really high impact, high investment clubs. And the rest really sort of falls as it does. And I think for folks who follow even just the Heartland division, you sort of get the sense of that, of sort of which clubs clearly want to invest in those kind of resources and which ones are maybe just a little bit leaner on the setup side.
Yeah. Well, and I think the one nice thing is it happens with I mean, on the men's side, you see it's a much more crowded and chaotic population of leagues there, but you see it too, where of course there's certain teams that really set a standard. You think of like Detroit City when they were in the NPSL, and then in NISA, they were the standard, and it was a great thing. And eventually also you're seeing now there's an ecosystem where it should be the case that when the teams are thriving in a league like this, of course, they're positioned to, as there's more pro teams, they eventually move on to a place where they actually have the potential to take that step. So that's a good thing. And obviously that's what people are thinking when they're creating these pro leagues. There are people ready to take the step. So yeah, it's nice. So, I mean, but for the teams in the first year who are putting all the pieces together, realizing the challenges, it is a good thing to have the example of where you need to go. So that is a positive, because there's teams here that show it's possible, and then they can move towards that.
Well, and the one equal, you know, you and I always call out Green Bay as a clear example, where I think sometimes folks talk about, even like, you know, Wes jokingly quotes the Millinaros as like refers to the Aurora, and the Rochester folks referred to Aurora as the $1 million
team, baby, and Rochester United.
So I do think sometimes people get lost in that part of the story, that Aurora raised $1 million, and so that's why they're set up so well. But the example we always point to, or the several examples in the upper Midwest, is like Mankato in the WPSL, Sioux Falls in the WPSL, and then Green Bay in the W League are really the three in the upper Midwest who are not that heavily resourced, but they just are incredibly committed to, if they're going to do it, they do it the right way. And so Green Bay in particular in the Heartland division, if folks made that trip last year where they didn't make it, you should really try it this year, because it's a great game day environment. It's a cool little stadium, maybe the biggest video board you and I have ever seen in our lives.
Yeah, it's a bug in my brain. I don't know why, but it would terrify me to play in Green Bay.
I think, to be honest, if folks want to talk about, you know, what's a model team for folks to copy themselves after, I would actually almost argue it's Green Bay, because Green Bay does it with almost no resources, but they just really give a shit. And so that's the one that even when I talk to league folks, that's the example I give of like, it can be done pretty well just by being very committed to having a high standard.
Yeah. Well, and also I got to give a shout. I know like we gave them the shout last game because it was after the Rochester match, but that team, I mean,
Yep.
they're 0-5, and that's just not representative of what that team looks like at this point. So credit to Rochester. Of course, they're close to the cities and they have some players in the metro, but it is not easy. It's harder to get sponsors. It's harder to get players. It's harder to do everything when you're the further you get from a metro like the Twin Cities. So credit to teams like Rochester who, quite frankly, like that's why I joked, even I wouldn't be surprised if they put a run of results in and like, oh, oops, they won 3 or 4 against the worst teams. And so they're doing that with really local players. And, you know, I saw like Superior City won again. This is a detraction in the UPSL. Superior City has only players from Duluth, Superior, and 2 Harbors. That's it. And Cloquet. That's crazy. And they're all D3s. And it's UPSL is you would say the lowest of the summer league in terms of like talent depth, I guess. But they're just winning, and it's all local people, which is crazy.
To give people an idea of like how well Superior City is like coached and run on the soccer side, they have high school players from ESCO, a few high school players from ESCO on the team.
Who made it to state, by the way, though. Made it to state last year.
They're very good. But to put that in perspective of like how big of a high school ESCO is, that's the type of school district Mark and I grew up playing soccer against. Like that's how rural and small. And they just are clearly well coached. They clearly are well prepared. Like they're getting results. And as much as we say, you know, comparing the 3 summer leagues, there are some pretty legitimate clubs in that UPSL conference. You know, the St. Croix of the world, several other metro area ones, the Wave. Folks
Tonka, you know,
Tonka Fusion Elite, which is a very, very good sort of under-recognized club. A lot of top youth players go there. You know, children of like, you know, D1 coaches send their kids to Tonka Fusion Elite. Like it is a pretty legit setup for sure.
So Aaron Chastain's good.
Sure. Who's to say?
I can put the pieces together. I want to this is something Revantelet members talk to me about because they're so into this club. Well, also they're owners. This is the thing, like people are owners. They come and talk to me about details that I don't expect them to care about. But one of them is like all these founders who we would see just like scrapping around the stadium, helping with every element.
Right.
The club's kind of growing up. You have some staff in place. I'm just curious. They wonder like, oh, how's it different for the founders to get to actually just kind of view and enjoy it and actually take in the atmosphere?
Yeah, it's night and day from year 1 to year 2, partly because, you know, year 1 for all of us, you know, I'm one of the 9 founders and everything we did back then was for the first time. And so you're really learning and doing at the same time. Yeah. So, you know, I would be literally setting up the benches and I don't know like where Nicole wants the benches and where she wants the coaches' chairs or player meals, figuring out like what kind of food the players actually like and then getting places that will actually deliver and how does it get delivered. I mean, like the most minute details were the things we were focused on. And you know, this stage of the club, we're really close to getting to a full staff build out where founders are no longer doing any day-to-day roles. So for, you know, for an example for folks, technically I oversaw the soccer side last year and immediately after last season, you know, Nicole promoted into that role where she's the head coach and sporting director. And so the entire sporting side is now under Nicole as a paid staff person who's an expert in that space. Or, you know, the example of you having Jessica Poole on, our new COO, she now is in charge of the entire front office, which is just such a huge, huge step because, you know, we as board members, there's a group of 5 of us plus the community board members, so 7 board members total. You can't really do things efficiently as a group of 5 or a group of 7 or a group of 9 on a day-to-day basis. And so this year has been a really big step where, you know, no longer are founders running the merch tent, no longer are founders, you know, doing all of those pieces. And so it's a really big step because it means the club can actually begin professionalizing on the staff side. And you can't really have ambition as a team and as a club if you're continuing to group project your way through the world. And so I think handing it over to professionals, folks who know what they're doing, folks who are experts, and giving them sort of the ability to run things day to day. I mean, transitioning from me to Nicole is easily the best example of that.
That was a smooth one, yeah. That was a smooth one.
Someone who pretends to talk and know about soccer to someone who's, you know, literally the coach of the year, you know, an A licensed like soccer expert. And so that was maybe the single biggest upgrade the club made in the offseason.
I mean, look, plenty of the biggest strength we have is other people's lack of knowledge in women's soccer. So they'll just say, "Wow, you really know," and it's, well, you don't watch it, so I guess I just look at some stats every week, and then here I am. Let's talk about, we got some equal time gear, which I'm really excited about, and people are already wearing it. We don't have ours yet, which is funny, but it's like the people who buy it should get it first. But it is a really cool thing. Part of it is we're donating towards a really cool cause. This is Pride Month too. Just talk about the cause we're supporting.
Yeah. So, and the crazy thing is, so today is Raylan Baker's birthday.
Oh,
it's literally his birthday today.
Happy birthday, bud.
So Raylan came to the Gophers. I said this in like the GoFundMe description, but if folks have not clicked through links or whatever, Raylan came to the Gophers, literally was offered full scholarships to play basketball, you know, like 6'5", 6'4", 6'6", legitimately huge. Came in, and you'd think this player comes in and, oh, if they're that big, they must just be like a goony forward who sits in the box. Right. No, he was like one of the cheekiest, most creative like players when he in his playing days.
Technical and clever,
super technical. Teammates would chuck just garbage balls at him, and he had just perfect redirect headers, perfect shoulder shrug headers. Was the ultimate amplifier, you know, amplification player, made everyone better. Unfortunately, his playing career got cut short when he began medically transitioning. So he transitioned partway through his Gopher career and was allowed to play early on. But then once he began medically transitioning, was no longer allowed to play because of NCAA rules. And so this summer, you know, he's been in the medical transition process. This summer is when his surgery will actually take place, which is such a big step for folks who have been through that journey before. And insurance covers part of it, but doesn't cover all of it. And so, you know, $5 from every hat and $5 from every jersey we sell will go directly into that fund. I think about $2,000 has raised. We really want to raise closer to like $5,000 or $6,000 because we don't want, you know, someone just trying to be who they are, you know, to drive them into extreme debt. That's sort of the type of bullshit that shouldn't exist. So if you want to get a hat, if you want to get a jersey or get it for someone else, know that the proceeds are going to that good cause. And also know, you know, we are so thankful for the folks who have already bought it. So thankful to all of our patrons. We've added, you know, maybe a dozen patrons this summer because you guys are so psyched about all the Aurora coverage that Mark and Danny do on a regular basis, all the stuff Equal Time does. But if you don't want to be a monthly supporter because you just don't want to throw us, you know, monthly income, buy a hat instead, give it to someone. It's $25, jerseys are $50. Yeah, for sure. And happy birthday, Raylan.
And Raylan, you can also just donate to Raylan's thing. Totally. You don't have to, if you don't want to, if you got enough soccer shirts and enough hats, just donate to Raylan.
The links. Yeah, it's all over our feed. It's been. I'm sure you find it if you look at our account. Yeah, for sure.
And it's this is the thing. I'm in a queer soccer bar right now, which is an open space for us to use, and we're an inclusive sport, and it makes it better. The Wonderwall had a tifo in Pride Month, which was so cool. It's just all are welcome, and it's in transgender flag colors. And you know, it's a good thing about the game that it's inclusive, and it makes it better, and it's what makes it hopefully is also helping the game grow in a good way, because we want the soccer in terms of going pro and getting more money into it. If you're starting with good inclusive values, that should make a more positive future for the game. So
yeah, and folks, I'm sure folks know if they follow our. I mean, we try and amplify stuff all the time, but Minnesota is just going to be a place where people have to come and literally seek refuge. You know, there's tons of states where folks just aren't allowed to be who they are, and they're getting harassed and targeted and all those things. And so Minnesota, we Equal Time tries to be a little bit of a shining light on that, because Minnesota, frankly, is a shining light for that, where, you know, queer kids, queer folks, trans folks, like, they need a place to go where they can live their lives. And Minnesota is a place like that. And so Minnesota women's soccer should be a place like that.
Yeah, being inclusive is cool, guys. Just listen to Gen Z. Being inclusive is cool now. It's not cool to be. It's out. You're lame. You're washed if you're uninclusive. That's what a Gen Z. Did Z say washed? I think they do.
Yeah, for sure.
We don't know. Street. We're gonna watch him a little bit here. We'll see what we get out of 11, and then we'll get some on the ground stuff from Matt. Good work flying down. And by the way, this ridiculous person was at a funeral service for our grandma on Saturday, came back and flew to Chicago this morning and is flying back. He's out of his mind. Support us on Patreon. Bye, everybody.
All right, thanks.